All right, good afternoon. It is December 9th, and we are going to begin this meeting for the agricultural industry.
Yeah.
Oh, and as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded as public record, and that participation in a recorded meeting will be deemed as consent to be recorded, including statements both written and oral. Public records, including this recording, can be requested at any time in accordance with the Vermont Public Records Act. So welcome everyone. Happy December. I'm glad to see everyone. And I will first just do introductions, and I'm going to start with the room. The camera seems to only like me right now. So hi, I'm Morgan. I'm the one that bugs you with emails. I'm with the Agency of Ag. And also in the room, I will start just with Steph.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Smith, and I am Deputy Director of the Public Health and Agricultural Resource Management Division at the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets.
And also in the room, we have Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily May. I don't know if the camera will shift. I have it on my computer too. With the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. I'm Agricultural Conservation Lead with our pesticide program. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Thanks. And Sean?
Hi, I'm Sean Lucas, University of Vermont Extension, Extension Agronomy. I'm in the Middlebury office, and I think I'm rotating on to the board in February.
Okay, on the call, I'm going to start with the members I see. So, Jonathan?
Hi, Jonathan Chamberlain, the crop consultant on the board.
Thanks, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Abby?
Hi, Abby Pajak, DEC CAFO program.
Thanks, Abby. Roy?
Hey, good afternoon. Roy Beckford, Associate Dean on the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences and Director of Extension. Good to see Sean in the room.
And Pamela?
Hi, I'm Pam Wyman. I'm from the Vermont Department of Health, substituting or replacing Sarah Owen, who had moved on to another position in November. I'd like to report we have a new hire for those of you who are excited about this. As I am, we have a new toxicologist for the state of Vermont named Dr. Andrea Kirk, straight from EPA in Virginia, and she's wonderful. So I look forward to introducing her to the board as needed as well.
That's great. Yeah, you can just let me know if memberships need to change, if it's you or however that works. Just keep me posted.
Great.
Wendy Sue?
My name is Wendy Sue Harper. I'm in the soil biologist position. I'm a soil scientist, and I'm rotating off the board after February.
We'll miss you tremendously, Wendy Sue. Thank you for all of your effort in this. Okay, others that I see, Alicia?
Hey y'all, my name is Alicia Utter, and I'm here as a member of the public today. I'm a farmer and consultant.
Thanks for joining us, Alicia. Anna?
Hey there, everyone. Anna Superling with VPIRG here today.
Thanks, Anna. Pam Breyer?
Hi, everyone. I'm the agrochemical toxicologist with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets.
Thanks, Pam. Christine?
Hi, I'm Valakis. I'm here from the industry side from Bayer Crop Science.
Thanks, Christine. Jill?
Good afternoon, I'm Jill Goss, and with the Agency of Agriculture, I'm an agricultural input specialist.
Thanks, Joe. Heather?
Hi, all. It's Heather Darby from UVM Extension, agronomist and soil specialist. Hi, Wendy Sue. Can see your face.
Thanks for joining, Heather. Jared?
Afternoon, everybody. Jared Carpenter, Lake Champlain Committee.
Jared, Jonathan Wolf?
Good afternoon, Jonathan Wolf with Primer Piper here in Burlington, Vermont, on behalf of Crop Life America and Biotechnology Innovation.
Thanks, Jonathan. Mia?
Hi, everyone. My name is Mia Park. I'm at the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. I work with Emily on the pesticide team.
Thanks, Mia. And I think that I have everybody. Is there anybody who was on the call that I missed for an introduction? Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody, and we appreciate Xerces Society coming today to kind of talk through their recommendations, but I'm going to do a few just logistics first. And the first one is meetings. So last time we met was in October, and I sent out the minutes and I didn't hear about any edits or anything. So are we okay accepting those as and cool? And then the last thing that I wanted to touch on kind of goes into this Agency of Ag update. And so first of all, Steve Doynell is not able to be with us today. So he sends his regrets. He is at a national meeting where state lead agencies for pesticide regulations talk so that everyone can kind of be on the same page and connect with EPA. So it's really important that he's there. So he is sorry to not be here, but is doing good work for Vermont. And secondly, so it's that time of year. And so our AIB annual report is due to the legislature on January 15th. So I have a draft of that report, and I will, it's actually on our SharePoint right now if you are daring enough to go and look at it. And basically it looks similar to our previous annual reports where it goes through what our focus has been for this year. Again, this year it's been neonics for the most part. We have had a sprinkling of other topics that we heard about in the early part of the year before the Neonic Act was introduced. And so it goes through mainly about what we heard and then what we kind of, I tried to summarize our comments in one way of kind of summarizing the results from that best management practice member survey where basically we prioritize them. And so that will be in the report. And the results from our survey to farmers. And so we did one survey that was conducted at a poll during a agricultural pesticide applicator training meeting run by UVM. And so we have the results of that poll. We heard about those results in March. And so those results will be in the report, but I wanted to tell you guys that we had talked about also doing those same questions with the UVM entomology research lab, Margaret Skinner. So she had planned to send out a survey as well at the end of summer. It got delayed, and so it actually just went out a few weeks ago. And so we will get those results. I've asked them to give us kind of whatever results she has before the holidays, so the end of this month. So we'll have those results for our survey as well, to go into that report, and then we'll be able to talk to the members about that too. I'll give a little presentation of what survey we get. But basically we're getting early results from their survey. They're really going to push their survey at, I think, the New England Veggie and Fruit meeting that's in January, I think. So it was too tight for me to wait for that to put it in the report. So we're going to ask for whatever results she has before that. So those are the two ways that we disseminated our survey this year. And so I guess I'm just going to ask members, the report will be due before we meet next. So we'll be meeting on the 27th of January. So just keep a lookout in your email to review a report. Probably at the beginning of the year. It'll be finalized at the beginning of the year, and then we'll get it to the legislature by the 15th. But it is on SharePoint. I can send out those links with our minutes. Does any members have any questions or anything they want to put in the report that I haven't just mentioned? Cool. All right. So with that, I think, Emily, you can have the floor. So the members did receive your best manager practice recommendation 2 weeks ago. Yeah, about that. So they have seen that we shouldn't be foreign to them, but an introduction would be great.
Okay, that's good.
All right, thanks.
And am I good on the audio here? Pretty good.
Can you all hear Emily when she's talking?
Okay. All right, great. Well, thanks for having me. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can share the window. But I'm going to introduce the. Okay, cool. I'll introduce myself. I've sat in on a few of your meetings before, so maybe I'm not super unfamiliar to you, but my name's Emily May. I'm the Agricultural Conservation Lead with the Xerces Society's pesticide program. And for those of you who might not be familiar with Xerces, we are a science-based conservation organization that works really at the intersection of conservation and farming. Our largest programs are in pollinators and agricultural biodiversity and in endangered species. And our efforts focus on protecting insects through habitat creation, implementation of integrated pest and pollinator management, and reducing risks from pesticides. So my path into this, if you are interested in my background, it's rooted in both science and in hands-on ag experience. I studied biology at Middlebury College, where I co-led the student farm. And then my first job after college was on a veggie farm. And then I went back to school to get a master's in entomology from Michigan State, where I did research on wild bees in commercial blueberries. And then joined Xerces and came back to Vermont, where I was housed for a little while at UVM, working on outreach for a collaborative research project on pollination. But now at Xerces, my focus now is really on bridging science and practice to protect pollinators and build resilient food systems in ag. So I handle everything from sort of farm scale planning, working directly with growers to design and plant habitat, and then staying on top of things that happen on state and federal level in terms of policy and regulation, like what EPA is up to. And so yeah, my work spans everything from the details of crop production and management to how a specific pesticide might interact with different suites of insects. So to just come back to what these BMPs, I don't know if you had a chance to look, they're detailed. These were put together pulling from as many resources as we could find and as many experts as we could find. So these BMPs were really set up in a few different sections. So thinking about what the legislation asked for, there's BMPs for the use of the needed neonic treated seeds, but there's also BMPs more generally for agricultural use of neonics. And then a section that is looking at the prohibited uses under the bill if used under an exemption. So looking also beyond treated seeds to the other uses that were mentioned in the bill. And so these were really aiming to be grounded in science and built around sort of bread and butter integrated pest management practices, which is a well-established framework prioritizing prevention and monitoring, integrating different practices, and then using thresholds to ensure that pesticides are only used when they're economically justified. So these were put together and then refined through a lot of input with extension and research professionals. I'm glad Heather's on the call because she is the expert here. But we were aiming for the best science and pulling from a whole bunch of different resources, which many of you are also going to be very familiar with, having done this now for 2 years, to try and write up the set of practices that seemed both effective and reasonable. So also trying to fill some of the gaps left by existing guidance, including from EPA, to fill in some of those critical areas where we see downstream risks from neonics, like dust off and disposal of treated seeds. So I'll just kind of walk through some of this stuff, and then I don't know if I should just open it up for questions or thoughts. I know you've already thought about draft rules in the last meeting, but I'll just walk you through what we thought was some of the most important pieces of this framework. So starting off, every section of these BMPs is really built around basic integrated pest management practices, monitoring thresholds, justifying use with thresholds, and then combining that with sort of mitigation of drift and runoff when those are used. So at the beginning here, we're looking at the section that's on the use of neonic treated article seeds. And we started with just IPM framework and how do you get treated seeds into an integrated pest management framework. This is exactly, as far as I understand it, what Heather's been working on for a long time and is continuing to refine, figuring out what that threshold might be for, when you're scouting and monitoring, and ideally layering on some information about existing management practice in a particular field. And that you would then ideally, again, be able to make a decision about whether or not you're using these treated seeds based on the pest pressure that you're seeing in the field combined with field conditions. So this was pulling in information from different sources on thresholds and seed pests, consulting different risk assessment and prediction tools to try and understand, in that field, in that year, based on what you had last year, what makes sense for use of treated seeds or not. And feel free, I guess at this point, it's probably easiest if you feel like jumping in as I start going through these sections before I get 15 pages in. Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I'll let you know if anyone raises their hand, right?
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay. One thing that I didn't see a lot about in other publications was thinking about prevention measures and management practices that help minimize emergence and damage from seed pests. Some of these, are available through UVM extension guidance, and then some were pulled from other places. But these are just the types of more detailed recommendations around practices that can help with the to reduce the impacts of seed pests, right? So if you're seeing, let's say, seed corn maggot coming into a field, they're going to be really attracted to organic matter. And that is particularly amplified after you till that in. So if you are incorporating cover crops with tillage, waiting to plant, if using tillage to incorporate that living cover, you're going to get past sort of the immediate problem with seed corn maggot. So just to take a step back, as I was looking at the draft rules from last time, it seemed like a lot of that language was advisory and not, it was using should statements, should do this, should do that. I think one of the things I'm hoping to talk about with you is to think about what are the minimum standards? What are the basic framework that are enforceable to try and sort of set the minimum floor for use of neonicotinoids and neonicotinoid treated seeds. The intent is to basically reduce harm to our natural resources. What's the floor? As I look at this, there's a lot of detail. Not all of this has to be in a rule. This is a lot of guidance. And so I think the thing I'm hoping to say here is just that we can hopefully get the framework right and set the minimum floor, hopefully encourage an IPM framework, and then leave some of those implementation details that can change, like specific thresholds in science-based guidance outside of rules. So that's one of the things I wanted to mention. But, noticing that something like follow the label was in advisory language in the draft rule. And that seems like something that should be an enforceable, shall follow the label rather than should follow the label. Like that's pretty minimum standard. So all these broad subheadings I'm thinking in these draft BMPs that I gave, like reduce dust off at planting and minimize risk to pollinators, those could be, shall statements rather than should statements. And then more specific guidance that has the potential to change could be hammered out in outside guidance. So I have a whole couple of sections in here that are again about treated seed. These are the basic recommendations after listening to many of your meetings about how to reduce dust off at planting and pulling from the literature on it. But using no-till planting, reduced tillage, these were all sort of reviewed and got a lot of input from different sources, but these were the best recommendations that we could come up with about how to reduce dust off and dust emissions from planting equipment. Some of these are very similar to other things that you will have seen, and then some may take a different tack. So for example, on fluency agents, we were seeing some mixed evidence on the synthetic seed lubricants and net emissions of neonics, that there were particularly concentrated amounts of neonics in some of the fluency agents, but maybe they travel less far. So we weren't completely convinced about recommendation to use an alternative seed lubricant. And so we kept this one pretty minimal and just said use the proper rate to make sure people aren't over adding things like talc and graphite or a different fluency agent to make sure that those are staying, that the dust off would stay minimized from high rates of seed lubricants. This is just planter depth. Don't raise the seeder at the end of the row without switching off the seed supply, and then making sure to cover any seed that spills during loading and seeding. Any questions so far? Okay, I'll just keep going. One thing I noticed in the notes, I did just want to mention that we divided out in these BMPs between treated seed planting and other, foliar applications of neonics in ag, and had two different recommendations for advance notice for communication with beekeepers. It seemed like treated seed planting or seed planting in general is something that can shift with weather conditions very rapidly. And so 48 hours might be challenging for some of these folks who are planting large acreage. So there's two different advance notice recommendations in here. There's a 24 hours advance notice one for seed planting, and then there was a 48 hours advance notice for other agricultural uses of neonics. Just to note that, because I saw that was in the comments on the rule from last meeting. These are pretty basic recommendations for mitigation of dust, runoff, erosion, and leaching, some of which intersect with stuff that's coming in with the new herbicide strategy, insecticide strategy that's thinking about filter and buffer strips to help prevent runoff and drift reaching aquatic habitats. Similar for neonics because they can move in so many of those ways. We had a little bit more detail, I think, on loading and cleaning and PPE for how to handle materials when you're handling seed and seed bags. And some of this was coming out of the new occupational exposure information around neonics that EPA released earlier this year. So this is thinking about how to, wash and dispose of PPE to protect workers, and then how to clean and rinse equipment away from pollinator habitat. I saw some of this was in the draft from last time too. And then one of the things that I really wanted to make sure is in the rule is around disposal. And I could talk your ear off about treated seed disposal, but this is it's a challenging area. I saw a lot of good information already in the existing draft, but I just wanted to make sure that there were some other alternative disposal options in here, specifically guidance around planting out of excess seed, and then also disposal in like lined landfills or incineration or via other hazardous waste disposal streams. I don't know to what extent there are options at this point for returns of excess seed or seed byproducts like seed bags by companies in Vermont. We only have one lined landfill in the state, so there are definitely some limitations in this area, but there's the potential for quite a bit of contamination coming from mishandling of treated seed disposal. All right. I'll keep going. Do you want to talk about treated seeds at all before we keep going? Happy? Okay. So that's treated seeds. The rest of this is first agricultural use of neonics that were not touched by the bill. Again, working around an integrated pest management framework. One of the things I did notice about the draft that was posted from last meeting is that the definition of IPM really didn't meet sort of a typical standard definition of IPM that's focused on combination of techniques and integration of monitoring and thresholds. There's a much better definition that already exists in the rule for control of pesticides in Vermont around, pesticides are only used after monitoring indicates they're needed. So I would encourage thinking about that definition and improving the definition to include thresholds and monitoring, even if we don't define what the thresholds are in the rules, which I don't think needs to necessarily be in there. That could be an outside guidance, but using those predetermined thresholds is really a critical part of using IPM to justify use of pesticides. That seems like the minimum standard. And there's plenty of thresholds, not for every pest and in every crop, but the vegetable management guide and tree fruit management guide also set economic thresholds for New England crops. So this is a framework that can apply. The nice thing about IPM is it can apply at very small scales and at very large scales and in different ways. So getting just the basic framework right can work for a lot of different contexts. Pretty basic, label is the law. And again, something that seems pretty much like the floor for a minimum standard. And then the rest of this is ways to target and reduce drift and offsite movement from different applications. And I think the thing to discuss here is really, where do you want to set your minimum standards? What are things that are going to stay the same over time, and what are things that might change over time with new guidance. And so where should you set your floor and what should you leave in outside extension-based guidance? So that's something you can discuss, amongst yourselves as you're setting the floor here with these rules. There's a lot of stuff in here that's not present in the draft rule. So if you're seeing things in here that you feel like, yeah, this is a good minimum floor. The reason I submitted this was so you had an easy way of just copying and pasting into your own document to make it easy. These are pretty basic recommendations, very, in general, we were just looking for pretty standard guidance, reasonable guidance around applications that reduce drift, reduce movement into pollinator habitat or habitat around fields, targeting, making sure to considering using precision ag technology to help avoid overlap and using more product than is needed, using coarser droplet sizes to reduce spray drift potential, certain conditions you can apply avoiding in. I think a lot of this ended up making it into your draft. And then regular calibration of spray equipment. But some of this stuff I think was not in there. This was language around how to minimize risk to pollinators and pollinator habitat, around drift. We at Xerces talk a lot with growers about tank mixes and applications within a certain time frame where pollinators are exposed to one thing and then they're exposed to something else that interacts in their body with that first thing. And that is maybe something that doesn't make sense in this rule, but is something that we're definitely thinking about as something that we see creating a lot of hazard in some of these landscapes that can be avoided if made at separate times so that pollinators aren't exposed together to those things that we know increase the toxicity of the mixture to pollinators. This is the second notification recommendation that was 48 hours. And you may have already talked about this, but the Drift Watch tool, I know there's folks working to bring that to the state to sort of get hive locations registered and make that communication, facilitate that communication easily. One thing I didn't see also was the trunk injections and soil applications. So most of this guidance was written with foliar applications in mind, but trunk injections and soil applications, when made to a flowering plant, can pose risks to pollinators. Sometimes with trunk injection and soil application, because the residues end up being protected from UV breakdown, they can be quite persistent. So timing actually matters a lot. So if you're applying, in spring, let's say, before a tree blooms, you might have quite high residues remaining in those flowering tissues afterwards. And in some cases, even applications made in the fall can end up at toxic or, relevant levels in pollen and nectar the following spring. So taking a look at residual toxicity and thinking about timing for those applications when made to flowering species by trunk and soil injection be something to think about. Exist the pesticide rule, so it might not make sense to include them here, but we were trying to line up buffer zones basically with that Vermont rule here. So probably don't need to duplicate, but in terms of any kind of outside guidance, I figured it would make sense to have everything line up with the requirements that were already in place for buffers around water sources and pollinator foraging sites. And then I think the additional ones that we added in here were just filter strips along waterways at the application site for capturing runoff. Because I'm working very much in the intersection of habitat creation and habitat protection, we also included some providing safe habitat outside of cropped areas, protected from pesticides, and again, more specific guidance here around PPE, training, warning signs, and recommendations around loading, cleaning, and maintaining equipment. And again, more storage and disposal information. And then I'll just end with this last section, which is the BMPs for use of neonics otherwise prohibited under the bill, but under an exemption order, which I didn't see in that original draft from last time. But the prohibited uses that could potentially receive an exemption order, I don't know what the agency's thinking about with these, that were in the bill included outdoor application of neonics to any crop during bloom, outdoor application to soybeans or cereal grains, outdoor applications to a variety of different vegetable crop groups harvested after bloom, and then application to ornamental plants. So it seemed like it would make sense to have some BMPs in place for that. Again, most of this was built around integrated pest management, and we asked that applicators followed BMPs for non-prohibited uses in addition, but these were sort of more specifically, let's say there's some kind of emergency, agricultural emergency, and there's an exemption order written. What do we want in place in order to protect pollinators from those uses, some of which actually I think are prohibited already under the federal label, like outdoor applications to crops during bloom. So I don't know that those would, happen under an exemption order, but some of them in other places might. So these were some just specific thoughts around how to reduce, drift, runoff, et cetera, exposure of pollinators when used in these particular crop groups. And then specifically on ornamental plants, which pose particular risks because of the potential to expose pollinators to flowering ornamental plants. So just some more things to think about with these prohibited uses, which it seems possible that, let's say we got a new invasive insect species, that there would be some emergency exemption for use on an ornamental plant. Seems possible.
What about existing invasives or introduced species of insects?
Yeah, I mean,
I said new ones and stuff.
New ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's up to the agency to decide anyway, in terms of what is, what's the definition of an ornamental plant, and does that include, let's say, flowering ornamental trees that someone might be treating for some existing invasive species? Yeah, I don't know. Would you consider an ash tree to be ornamental?
If it was planted for aesthetic reasons.
Yeah, aesthetic purposes.
Aesthetic purposes or not. Yeah.
Perennial trees.
Yeah.
It would be reasonable to conclude
right.
that it meets the definition of an ornamental. Yeah.
So yeah, you already have invasive species affecting those then.
We do.
Yeah. And spotted lanternflies coming.
Don't say that.
Not here. All right, that's all I've got for you. I would love to take any questions, or just leave it at that.
Thank you. Do any members, I mean, we can transfer to the rule if it makes sense. So I know, Wendy Sue, you put in a bunch of comments into the rule that I believe, if I was reading them correctly, was pulling in things from these recommendations. So that can be a good transition, but if anyone has any question based on what they've read when they were given this in the last couple weeks. Okay. I think I'll seal it back. And I can go to the draft rule, because so it kind of goes to the Um, let's see. Okay. Did anyone other than, I see Wendy Sue added new comments since last time, and I don't see it from anybody else, but, so Wendy Sue, let's start with you of where, well, okay, hold on. So we heard from Wendy Sue's comments last time, and also Brian Kemp, and, Ryan Rebozo left a comment, was not able to join us at the end of October, and again, had to miss today. But, those initial comments that were given after last week, we tried to suggest some edits to the rule to try and incorporate those things. We can change the definition of IPM here. So Wendy Sue did have that comment of it was missing the 4 tenets of IPM. I would say the pesticide rule also doesn't specifically spell out those 4 tenets of IPM. And it always is best when introducing a rule to have the same, pull a definition from somewhere else, right? You don't want 5 different definitions of something. So if we would rather have the pesticide rule definition for IPM, that's fine. I don't think I can put it here as an option for later, for members to have, but in this edit, we just kind of put in the monitoring and the thresholds and prevention and prioritizing other practices prior to just, widespread pesticide use. And I think the only other comments that we addressed when we were kind of like mirroring those tenants in the ordering of our lists. So we rearranged the ordering of some of the lists that were in the draft rule to get at the preventative methods first. So then the pesticide usage, best management practices were listed last. And we can still go through that. But Wendy, see, let's do some of your new comments here. I see this first one is about PPE and training. Also, this is the general of the adhere to the label. So this is section 3 in the rule is treated seed.
So Morgan, I just wondered if under the general, and I think if you click on the actual comment, it will take you to the place where I was under general. I thought maybe that should be included there. I wasn't sure, but I know it's required in a lot of other things, but it's never a bad thing to remind people to, wear their PPE and make sure everybody who's using the material is trained.
You kind of mean like WPS training, like that type of training for the treated seed?
Yeah, to make sure they've had the appropriate training, whoever they have on the farm that's using the material.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it doesn't belong there, but that was just my thought.
No. I think it's a good thought. I think that it almost can be like, for example, right? Those things are going to be on the label, right? At least the PPE for sure is going to be on the seed label. The tricky, we have this opportunity. These are just comments received. The pesticide label is the law. The label on a neonicotinoid treated seed is not a pesticide label. And so it has PP on there. Right now, you're right, this is written as a should. There is, I think, conversations right now of whether EPA can bolster the requirements on a seed label. I think that we can learn from what they're doing or not. You know what I mean? It's whether we want to be first or not, or wait to see what happens. This is a negotiating point. I think that's their the way that agency of ag sees it. That this is a negotiating point when rulemaking process happens. But I agree, Wendy Sue, we can most definitely put in those points in this to call out examples of things on the label that should be adhered to. Okay, so now we're in so we're still in the treated seed section under the subsection of IPM. Oh, no, that's not a new one. Yeah, so we reordered that to kind of bring up the prevention and using cultural mechanical options prior to pesticides. Here's your new one. So economic thresholds, I've talked to that.
So on this one, I thought if you're going to, you know, look at the economic, if you're going to, let me see, where do I want to put that? Oh, if you're going to choose an appropriate material, you need to know what those thresholds are before you know, it's like it's kind of in the process. So I thought that should be put in there between maybe B and C. Because you need those in order to determine whether you're going to treat.
I was just adding that of exactly where, so we can keep track of that.
I thought it would be between B and C on 3.05.
Okay.
I think that's where I wanted that one.
Yep, that makes sense. Okay, so the next comment is about rotating neonics with other classes of insecticides to avoid resistance.
That I would put as right after C, just as a reminder.
This one, I don't know. How do members feel about? So I know that this one definitely makes sense, and to be honest, right now, I don't know.
I think there's a bunch of different ways of dealing with resistance management other than just a rotation. You know, there's different modes of actions that can be used at the same time, different methods of control to prevent resistance. I think just the word rotate is not appropriate. That means not to use, when really in resistance management, it's different modes of action is really the methodology.
Do you want to talk, just remind us, Jonathan, about the resistance management that's built into seeds currently? Right, that they basically have that, right? Because they're trying to protect the seed industry.
Yeah, that's one of the issues with basically rotate out of neonics or rotate out of a chemistry. It then leaves that class exposed to resistance management. And whereas if you have multiple modes of action, it is the preferred method of resistance management, rather than, you know, rotating may still leave holes in other pieces for resistance to occur. So that's why I think rotating is probably not the appropriate word for that.
Is there a way, so is there another way to still incorporate resistance management, but is there a reword that can
I think modes of action, you know, different control modes of action, utilize multiple modes of action or however you want to do, because it doesn't have to be insecticide on insecticide. It can be genetic resistance. It can be other, you know, engineering pieces that can do the same thing.
Mind if I make a comment? Okay. Just that we know from other states and areas that the use of neonicotinoid seed treatments prophylactically is leading to increased use of insecticides in neighboring crops because the development of resistance to neonics in those crops. So, for example, in cotton. And so I do think I liked the idea of the rotation. Given that if you're still going to be combining and using multiple modes of action at the same time, you're still leading the potential for development of resistance in neighboring crop pests from low levels of neonics reaching them every year. I was also wondering, is the rate of seed treatment something that growers have the ability to choose with our seed choice right now?
That is correct.
Something like that. We did talk about, so in our draft rules, we have for communication, we have no person shall use a neonicotinoid seed without prior notification of at least 48 hours to an apiary on the premise. And the Brian, who's unable to join us today, I don't think Brian, you're not on the call, are you? No. Basically called out in October of the restrictiveness of this, and it's very difficult to know 48 hours in advance when you're going to plant. And when we just went through this before we could discuss this, we just said, oh, let's talk here, right? So kind of alternative communication. So it's scary when you hear that at least 48 hours, but it is at least, right? So it might appease kind of that comment of saying like, hey, this is being really restrictive to the farmers who really don't know, when you could set this, actually call out that like maximum time also, and then it keys you into, oh, well, I could notify them 3 months in advance, hey, in the month of May, I'm going to be planting here, right? So it seems really restrictive when you see the 48 hours, but in reality, that also means that you could do it 3 months in advance. You know, so it's an option here would be to call out the like maximum amount of prior time so that it is not perceived as such a restriction when really the same wording means the same thing. You're just, that time's not on there, so it doesn't make you think like that, like, oh my gosh, I have to do it 48 hours in advance. Well, in reality, you could do it. You know, you're gonna know whether you're gonna plant that field in corn or not. You know, so that could help with the perception of that in the rule. So that's an alternative option in there. I know Brian's not here to talk about that, but I know Jonathan Chamberlain, you had also called about this being restrictive, but do you think that might help in the perception of this, of calling out kind of a maximum time before?
I think 48 hours, I guess, you know, what it's going to do is, I assume the person who's going to plant the crop will just tell the apiary, the beekeeper, that I'm going to be putting a crop in here and there's probably going to be neonic, and then they have the choice to continue to stay there or leave, would be their choice. I mean, I think it's a little, you know, the farmer farming the field, you know, should have the choice as to what they do on that land. The apiary's there, you know, I guess they have to have a relationship. So I don't know. I guess I have mixed feelings about this. I think it is restrictive, but at the same time, there should be plenty of notice as to what's going on that land.
Yeah, I think that's the intent of this too, is just so, yeah, increase that communication, right? So there obviously some relationship there, right? That's there, I hope. And so it's just that increased communication, but it's not trying to be.
But I also think that it should go both ways, that a producer shouldn't show up one day and all of us, a crop farmer shouldn't show up all of a sudden one day in some rented land and there's a beehive. I also think that it needs to go both ways, that any apiary who's going to establish a hive or should have the courtesy to notify the operating landowner or the operator of the cropland they're putting their hives adjacent to. I think it goes both ways. And I think that's part of the communication. It wouldn't surprise me that there's rented land that somebody shows up on to plant their crop and all of a sudden there's a beehive because the landowner said sure, but the apiary never approached the operator of the land. So I think it goes both ways.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to capture that in this so we know that it's comments. So communication should go both ways. APR on property should notify operator of that land. About hive location.
I think this is the problem that Driftwatch tool is trying to solve, is just to make things more spatially obvious to people, that both apiary locations and also communication tool for the operator.
Mm-hmm.
Feel like I'd have to talk to beekeepers to understand whether they prefer that kind of long in advance input of like, well, on this land, there will be treated seeds planted in a couple of months versus in 24 hours, you should close your hives to prevent exposure to dust off.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, it's both.
Probably both. Yeah.
And, right?
Does the 3-month limit build the relationship so that they can communicate about that day, where they can actually cover and feed or whatever their steps that they want to take to protect their hives?
More communication, always good.
Okay, next one we reordered. So now we're in the section for use of neonic pesticide. So this actually gets out a little bit. The way that the rules are kind of wonky wording because they're not written as normal people talk or even think. And I'm calling myself that. They're not written the way that I normally think. So the neonic treated seed section, so we try to have this subsection, the applicability section. So this is when neonic treated seeds were used prior to them being prohibited or when a valid exemption order is issued, right? So whenever you're using a neonic treated seed, whether it's prior to January 1st, 29, or when you get an exemption order. So the same thing is with the neonic pesticide section. So the applicability is using a neonic pesticide under an exemption order that would have ordinarily been prohibited, using a neonic pesticide that is not prohibited ever, no matter what time, and or using it under an exemption order. Those are the only things, right? So basically, because we're not going to get this through, we don't have a prior to the prohibition because it won't be through before July. For rules, we're going to try, but stuff. So those are the kind of things. So that kind of like for the Xerces recommendation, separate that out, exemption order and any other use. So really, we're just putting them all together. Whenever you're using it, this is what you should do, right? So it's just like kind of lumping it. Okay, so now Wendy, Sue, I believe that you have one in here. Oh, for the IPM section for neonic pesticides.
Yeah, this one was to add the, developing the thresholds again. Because if you're gonna, spray, you need to know what those thresholds are. And that would go, I believe, right between A and B. Because the next one says, B says, use economic thresholds. Well, they have to be developed if you're going to use them. So you want to have developed those before you use them. That was my thinking anyways.
Okay. And then, okay, so our next section is drift prevention, and then this was a edit that put in for the non-target exposure mitigation. So kind of to make it mirror this similar section in the neonic treated seeds part of the rule. So to pull in non-target exposure with the drift. Okay, so when you see you have a suggestion, do not apply when trees and shrubs are in flower or shortly before flowering, avoid drift on flowering weeds in or around treated areas.
Since we were talking about drift, that to me meant spraying above ground. And so I thought that applied.
So we have like, not everything flowers the same time of year. So how is, when you're out targeting a particular pest or something, and there is one weed that happens to be flowering, I mean, are we dictating I guess I kind of have a logistical issue with how this is going to be accomplished and can and can't be. And it seems as if it's kind of a bit overbearing in the idea that nothing can be flowering at time of application.
Well, I would say on trees and shrubs, most of those guys flower in spring, with the exception of witch hazel, which flowers in, well, ours has still got flowers on it. It flowers in the fall.
But that's not what that comment says. It says flowering weeds as well.
That's true. So do you want that part removed?
To me, that makes it extremely sort of impossible to find a timing when there isn't some kind of species in the vicinity that doesn't have some sort of flowering part on it. That would be my concern.
I mean, you could change avoid into minimize. And that's the point of including language like this. It's also not enforceable because it's a should, not a shall.
I would say rule writing lingo, avoid and minimize is pretty much the same. Avoid is not a shall, right? Because you're avoiding, right?
Right.
Like it's
right.
Do your best to avoid kind of goes with avoid. So avoid isn't is similar to a should. But minimize also can be good spell option.
Because basically all the language before that in the drift prevention pretty much was trying to minimize any off-site movement. But then you're saying you can't do the application on site because of off-site. To me, it seems a little bit like catch-22.
My intention was to avoid spraying the trees and shrubs when they're in the flower, and to not, excuse me, my intention was not to apply, do not apply to the trees and shrubs when they're flowering, and to avoid, and that wasn't a do not spray, but to avoid, and I'm fine if you want to do minimize or something like that on the weeds.
Yeah, so when you see the first part of it is when the intention is, when the application is meant, when the site is on trees and shrubs. That's what, like, when the intended application is on the trees and shrubs, you're saying do not apply when they're flowering, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm trying to put in words what you just said, but I'm not doing a good job, but I didn't get previous, trying to just incorporate your comment into here as well, so both of them can be captured. Okay, these are great comments. Thank you, guys. Okay, so this is kind of at the end. I think when you see a couple of your comments here are just like add sections, not necessarily in this section, but add to the rule, right? So add creating safe pollinator habitat away from treatment areas.
Well, I put that in there because, NRCS will do cost shares on a number of pollinator, habitat things. And the CAP 148 is the most direct, though. It is to create pollinator habitat. And farmers can even choose the plants. And they can choose plants that, offer some benefits. Like I know veggie farmers will sometimes put a pollinator garden in, and they'll be able to cut herbs or flowers or do something with some of the plants because they get to pick what's in there. At least that's what they've told me. So I thought this might be a place for that.
I think the key word is choose. I don't think this should be in the rules that farmer needs to put in a pollinator friendly practice, even if there is cost share. I just think it's a choice that they want to make. If NRCS wants to fund those, I do think there's certainly a place for it. Producers want to do it. I would encourage them to do it, but I think this is in the rule process, not the right place for it.
Okay.
I think this gets at kind of what Emily also said during her introduction of the Xerces recommendation, is that there's a great need for a guidance that goes along with a rule. And so I do think that this is something that's great in a guidance. But then also hard to put in a rule, right? So it's tricky. So I think that it needs to be this like delineation between those two, which unfortunately it's hard not to think of it, in a comprehensive manner, like your recommendations, is a very comprehensive look at the problem and how we can change practices to address some of those concerns. But the way Agency of Ag has to think of it is a little bit in two separate pieces as far as a rule and guidance. And I do think we said that also about Ryan's comment in here also as examples of, can you include example methods of how to do something that was a best management practice in the rule? And it was called out like that. That's a great thing to put in the guidance, right? So things like that are great for guidance and, where we would love to see UVM extension, and we can help and collaborate with them to kind of put things like that into the guidance. So I think that I might do the same comment. This is where this guidance would be. It would be the same answer for Wendy Sue's comment, wherever I just lost. Okay. Wendy Sue, and this is a section on prohibited practices. And, we did actually, so when Zach was drafting these rules, we initially had like all the sections that were called out of what was prohibited and all of that. And we actually went through as an agency and said, well, why repeat? That's already in law, right? So if you're making a rule that's basically just repeating everything that's in the law, then that's kind of silly. And so we decided to take it out of it here just because it already is in the law. So that one thinking is don't repeat. Also thinking is if one should change, you don't want them to be, you want to make a reference, not actually spell out, so that if one changes, then it doesn't make the other one obsolete, so yes, we were on the same wavelength, Wendy too. But we could see the value in basically make reference to the law, and it accompanies it instead of repeating.
Okay.
I think this section is the same. Yeah, this comment is the same.
I thought I lost
wanna,
the comment, so I redid it. So
I see it, yeah.
That.
No, that's okay. I think it does call out though. I would love to hear any more comments from members that are on about aerial applications. And so right now, this rule does not prohibit aerial applications. Xerces recommendation recommends to not allow aerial applications of neonics, and I wanted to get members' thoughts on aerial applications.
I think drone applications should be exempt from the aerial application rule and basically treated as a separate entity rather than a fixed wing or propeller or helicopter-based application. It's much more controlled. It's much more in-field. I think it's very different than a fixed wing or other types of application methods aerially.
If that exemption is in place, Jonathan, do you think there is a place in the rule to call out a fixed wing, more traditional form of aerial applications should be included as a best management practice to be avoided or not, if drones were exempted?
I just think drones shouldn't be treated the same as a fixed wing aerial application. So I guess I don't know how you want to term it or describe it. But I just know drone application is not the same type of aerial application. You're really close to the ground. You're not flying over property lines. You're staying within the field boundaries. It's just a very different aerial application method than such as a fixed wing or a helicopter or something along those lines. I don't know how to explain that or put that in the definitions other than the fact it is very different.
Understood. Yeah, I guess I was asking. So right now, what should we? I mean, not necessarily just you, Jonathan, but any other. So I think Wendy Sue, you're calling out aerial application. I think you think that it should be included as something that should not be done with neonics. And that's
Yes,
something they
but
currently miss.
I think, oh, I'm sorry. I think that I'm just pulled up the other document. I also have it up. Aerial application is not defined in definitions. And so that may be a place where you can define, you can separate out aerial application includes drone application that is done, 6 feet from the ground or whatever, blah, 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 and you could make that distinction in the definitions, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing we might need to be wary of is that in the certification and training portion of the agency's administration of pesticide applications, we lump together all of those. And I'm certain we can navigate this, but that might be confusing if we start to break apart the drone from the fixed wing or helicopter applications in terms of defining what an aerial application is, because they are lumped in other portions of the agency's regulatory authority.
Yeah, I know I have seen some definitions that are like manned versus unmanned aerial vehicles.
There may be, yeah, there is that, and that's federal, I believe. Oh, actually, I can't remember. We don't have Zach with us today, so
He might be on.
He might be on. And we don't have to go into this. I think that we're just looking how to navigate some allowance and some prohibition based on type of aerial application. So yeah.
What we do have currently in the draft rule is, so we have a boom height, right? Maximum, and also no more than 10 feet above the canopy for aerial applications. Is 10 feet, I mean, that's obviously doable, so a drone can be within 10 feet, right, Jonathan?
Never flown or crashed one. I don't know.
Okay. I'm assuming that drones can be within 10 feet, but I guess I don't know if that automatically excludes fixed wing. They can be that close. Yeah.
What if someone has I get what Jonathan's saying, right? He's talking about very specific drone style applications, but what if someone gets a really big drone and flies it like a helicopter? You want to be careful about how it's worded.
Yeah. That's that's why I feel like this sentence gets at the why we would say no, right? Is because you don't want it to be, you want it to be more of a precise application.
So maybe it's not the aircraft, it's really the 10 feet that we're looking at.
But also there's a difference, like a drone's wash pushes that stuff to the ground versus other methods don't. So I think the ground application purpose on F is probably just fine for 10 feet. I mean, I don't know any sprayers that spray they're taller than 10 feet over the crop, very rarely, but I don't know. I just think it shouldn't be limited. I think drones are a different type of aerial application and should not be lumped in with that.
I don't know if you could call it precision drone application or something along those lines, but yeah, that's important.
Yeah, I mean, we see the highest drift with aerial applications in our work. The 10 feet is, yeah, in field conditions.
I'm just capturing these in the minutes so that just these comments can be captured and considered.
Hey everybody, this is Zach Schikowski.
Thank you.
I don't have the answer right now, but I'm more than willing to workshop this so it's not a definitive metric, for drone applications moving forward. That's all I have to say at the moment. Sorry, it's not more helpful.
That is helpful, Zach. Thank you. Okay. Did anybody else have comments after receiving Xerxes recommendations or after having a chance to better look at the rule of things that are either missing from the draft rule that should be included, or two, things that are in the draft rule that are should be removed or that should be elaborated on? Just any other comments from members?
I have one, this integrated pest management IPM definition piece. I think whatever that the 4 steps, I think is going beyond, when really we're going to be looking for local science-based. We are basically the only way this is going to work for growers in this state is if we are paired and matched with New York. And so if we're going to go out on a limb and start adding all these other parts and pieces, and we end up basically pinning our producers to not having options that are consistent with New York, I believe we are going to do the opposite of what the legislation said, which was to stay parity or stay in sync with New York and their process, because our producers, if they do not have New York in it with them, or they deviate from New York's process, I think they're going to be basically put at a major disadvantage. And so I guess I get real concerned when you start putting in some of this IPM language that's going to start putting additional constraints that are going to be separate and different from our counterparts in New York. So I get real concerned with that and really don't think we need to go any further other than the EPA's definition of integrated pest management. And I would say that basically to be the same with any of the BMPs that think the one piece that I can agree with on the other piece that was put forward to us was the section that basically referred to Cornell and local guidances for thresholds. So it'd be on the, I don't know whether it's the 3rd page, I think it maybe is the 3rd
Of the
page.
Xerxes one?
Right, that I can agree with. The rest of it, I think is going above and beyond what needs to be done. And again, it goes to the consistency of New York. Where are we going to be? How much more of a hindrance this is going to be to our producers, because it's already going to turn the world upside down in this region. So I think that's probably the only piece I would take out of that I can agree with, and basically utilizing the science from our local land grant universities, including Vermont, what Heather's going to do as the viable risk assessment tool to determining pest pressure and whether the seeded treat can be used or not based on the exemption process the Agency of Ag has. Other than that, I think that's where it needs to stop.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'll do a better job of capturing that in a minute, but.
So is it in New York they don't have to follow IPM? Because I don't understand. I don't understand in New York enough to understand what you're referring to.
So New York basically passed the law, which then Vermont sort of mimicked after. And Cornell has been tasked with, and I don't know, Heather, you maybe have more information on this, on where they're at in this process, but Cornell and other interested parties are coming up with the protocol and procedures or the BMP practices or risk assessment tools that will allow producers to utilize it on an exemption or not. And if we go to the extent that we can't use it, and Cornell goes to the extent that the allowable use is more widespread, then the availability of the seed and other uses that will allow producers to still have some sort of treated seed, whether it's neonic or not, or whatever the alternative is. If they go a different direction and they're not as restrictive as you guys are proposing to be with some of these recommendations, it's going to put producers in Vermont at a major disadvantage. And I don't think that's the intent of the law and the legislation, because they do connect to that. Am I speaking out of turn that if New York doesn't have the same restrictions or outlawing of the neonics, then Vermont's law does not go into effect as well? Am I wrong with that assumption from what I remember?
No, you are correct. If their law is repealed, then Vermont's law follows suit. It does, yeah, it does not take in effect.
But it's the overarching premise of the prohibition and the and the emergency to, well, maybe it's just the overarching prohibition, but it's not the details associated with how New York's implementing theirs.
Correct. Right. We're not tied in the details that you're explaining in the law. The law does not specifically have us do things lockstep with Cornell as far as the implementation of like criteria that needs to be met for an exemption to be granted. That's not in the law. However, I will say that we are trying our best, the Agency of Ag, to we've gone to Albany once, and we're trying our best to do this because we recognize that, yes, we're too small to do anything without thinking similarly as criteria.
Yeah, I see Heather's unmuted.
Yeah, Heather.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to chime in a little bit here. So I am working closely with the Cornell counterparts, especially in regard to, working on putting together the kind of risk assessment pieces. We have just, they have a couple $1 million to do their work, and we obviously don't have that. Not that Steve and others wouldn't provide it if it was there, but it's not. So we have to really work collaboratively to be able to build a database to better understand risk and determine, when exemptions would be granted. And I think Morgan already said this. like Vermont may decide exemptions are granted differently, but we're trying to use the same risk assessment tools. Either for New York or for Vermont. Again, they have far more resources than we do. However, we have parts of Vermont that they're not able to cover, interestingly, on the New York side. So they don't have as much emphasis in the Champlain Valley. So they're actually really excited to collaborate so that they can also utilize our data to help build their risk assessment tool as well. So I think it is shaping up to be very collaborative. You know, we're meeting in January to finalize the field protocols for this year, and our goal is to put into place what they're doing, but also do more on our own as well, because I don't necessarily agree with everything. Not that I don't agree with their methods, but I think they're actually a little bit limited, and I want to be more strategic in Vermont about farming systems that we collect data on. So as an example, our preliminary data shows that the probability of seed corn maggot infestation triples when there's manure and tillage together in a system or even separate. And a lot of the systems where the data has been collected, they don't have manure and they're predominantly no-till. So we have a lot of no-till, an increasing amount of no-till in Vermont, but we also still have a lot of tillage and we have a lot of manure. So, I mean, there are some pretty different nuances, I think, where the majority, you know, of our agricultural systems have manure, and so that's something we really need to focus on and look at risk there and how to manage that risk. So, I mean, we're different, but the same. And I guess to maybe not keep talking, we are collaborating. So everybody knows that.
Thank you, Heather. That's great news.
I'm sorry, now I'm talking again, and I have time in January, but I did want to say our preliminary data on fluency agents, and I think the recommendation maybe from Emily was people just use the fluency agents at the proper rate. But I will say that we did find some really interesting results with one fluency agent in particular that actually suppressed our collection of neonics in the dust, even over seed that didn't have any fluency agent at all. So and again, this is very preliminary, but some of the alternatives were just as bad as graphite and talc used at the proper rates. But this one fluency agent in particular actually appeared to just suppress any movement of neonics at all, which I found really interesting. So we're going to repeat that, and I'll show that in January. And the other piece is we only looked at 2 seed companies, but they were really, really, really different in the amount of neonics that came off of those seeds. They had the same rate and they had the same exact neonicotinoid treatment. But what came off of those seeds was like triple what it was on the other brand. And so I haven't talked to either of those seed companies yet because we're just sort of putting the data together, but I really wonder where the seed's being treated, how it's treated, and how is it that different? like 30,000 nanograms with talc versus, with the competitive brand, it was still higher, but it was only like 10,000 nanograms. So, and they had the same rate and the same insecticide. And when you looked at them without any fluency agent, the level of neonics obviously was very similar. So the fluency agents and how they react with the different seed brands, I guess, is very different. But overall, the alternative fluency agent, which is the Bayer product, suppressed the dust in both of those equally. So that was good. But anyway, so I think there's more to be looked at with the fluency agents, I guess is my feedback there, to basically say that just because it's not talc or graphite doesn't make it better. But it is worse when talc, graphite, and some of the others are on the seed.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? Heather, I'm wondering, we had a couple folks from Cornell look at this and sign off. And I'm wondering, with those risk assessment tools, do they incorporate any monitoring in as part of that process for making a pest risk assessment? Do you know?
Monitoring of the fluency agent coming off of seed or dust?
Oh, sorry, for seed pests, monitoring for seed pests. For their pest risk assessment tool.
Yes. I mean, they're doing a lot with modeling and growing degree days and sticky traps for seed corn maggot. And I think we know some of the limitations. The models are great and they definitely are going to tell us when things are going to arrive. And some of catching the populations the adults will tell us how bad it might be. But we also know it's like too late once we know that often. So if there's a way to try to estimate, and they know that too. So, I think there's a lot of factors that need to be combined, I guess is the point, to look at risk. So from monitoring and scouting to, what practices are being utilized in those fields, all of those things. Rotations, etc.
Thanks.
Yeah, Heather, it'd be great if you are available to come for January 27th.
Yeah, I gotta check my calendar and hopefully I'll have more of the data kind of complete by that time too.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Are there any more member comments on either Xerces or the draft rule, and both? Fine. Cool. I really appreciate everyone reviewing both the documents today, and I appreciate Emily for your time coming and talking through and being available for questions. And if things come up, obviously, you can reach out to me and I can reach out to Emily if there's anything else that members would like to know that they think of afterwards. So I think I am ready to open for public comment if we are all good, all members. Are you ready for that? Awesome. So if any members of the public who are joined with us today have any additional comments to make?
I have a question about scouting. Are there
Yeah.
guidelines for scouting in this? I mean, I'm relatively new to this ballpark, but one of the things I'm hearing from some of the farmers in the Champlain Valley is that they are, if there's exemptions to be applied and they have to apply for these exemptions, what does scouting look like in advance? How early do they need to start scouting? Because a lot of this is seed prophylaxis, right? And what does that process look like, I guess, is what I'm asking. They want to be clear on the process.
I think my answer to that is similar to that separation between rule and guidance. I think that's great guidance material. I think historically, there are some scouting methods for wireworm that are well known. Seed corn maggot, not great. It's kind of like,
It's more the one I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There isn't really anything that we found in our research in the last 2 years which is why this is such a tricky thing, is basically that's one of our major pests. But it's really hard to predict and know. So that's, so a lot of what Heather's doing is trying to get at, okay, what farming practices are increasing and or decreasing your risk of having the seed corn maggot. We can prove with sticky traps when flights happen. And so we can try and get more and more data over time with that. And that's, I think, what Cornell is doing to try and model that. So then with growing degree days, you can figure out maybe that, because once you see it on the sticky trap, it's often also too late, right? So that's like your peak flight, but they're already caused a problem. And so, yeah, a lot more learning needs to be done for that, for seed corn maggot. And so that's one of the reasons why it's kind of an unknown. So there isn't specifics in here in the rule about scouting, but even to put it in a guidance, I think we need to know more before we can even put specifics in guidance. But that's a good, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. That's, what
There's
we're
the
lacking.
challenge.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't put it in the rule because also it could change over time. And if we put it, like, rules don't react quickly to change over time.
Yeah. Any other public comment? Great. Oh, I did see, wait, was there a chat? I'm really bad at it. Monitoring the chat. Christine. Yes, the Xerces will be available for sure. The draft rule that was shared is still draft. I don't know a protocol for sharing. The recording of the meeting will definitely be online, hopefully by the end of the week, as well as the minutes. I have to check on our protocol of the mock-up of the rule if I can put that online. I just don't know our protocol on that, but it will be in the recording. The recording of the meeting will be there. But if I'm allowed to, I will put it online in draft form. And again, that will probably be by the end of the week. All right, I thank everyone very much for your participation. Thank you very much for reviewing documents. Thank you very much for comments and helping us draft these rules so that they're useful. So thank you all and happy Monday.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.